Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Now, as you can see, I'm basically switching places for like every other video. But yeah, what can you do? For today, I just decided to take a look at the Benko Gambit. And if you watch the whole video, you'll know the ideas for white and black in this opening. And also how the players from the past, the great players like Karpov, played against this opening. So that's why I decided to show you a Karpov's game today. And basically the Benko's Gambit starts with the moves d4, knight f6, c4, and now this interesting move c5. Now this move is interesting because the Benoni opening can arise after d5, e6, knight c3, he takes, you take, and d6. But okay, this is the topic for another video. Today we're looking at the Benko Gambit, which is after c5, d5, just giving up the pawn with b5. And as we all know, the best way to beat a gambit is to accept it. So we just take on b5, and now what? a6, just offering you another pawn. Now it seems maybe a bit dubious, but it's actually a pretty great weapon for black. Now here you of course also take this pawn, because otherwise he's going to capture your pawn back. Now, black is almost always going to fianchetto his bishop to this nice g7 square, just to put pressure here on this diagonal. So after g6, you just play knight to c3, developing the knight to the most natural square on the board, and now black finally takes on a6. Now there are different variations. One of them is to play g3, bishop to g2, knight to f3, and play with e4, but today we're looking at Karpov's way of playing against it, and this is with immediate e4. Now this variation is really interesting because you're basically allowing black to take the bishop on f1, and after you recapture, you'll no longer have the right to castle. But luckily for us, this is not a problem, because we're just going to play g3 and our king to g2, and our king is going to be perfectly safe. So here black has to continue with normal developing moves, just d6, and after g3, like we said, just bishop to g7, king to g2, and knight to d7. Now after knight to f3 and castles, let's now look at the plans that both sides have. Now where's black's compensation? Black basically sacrificed the pawn during the first few moves, and as you can see we have an extra pawn here on the a file, but where's actually black's compensation? Well, black has two open files, a file and b file, on which he's going to try to create counterplay against these two pawns. He's basically going to try to attack the pawns with his rooks and also with his queen. Now our mission as white is to protect these two pawns and also try to play according to our plan, which is going to be to play rook to e1 and to play e5. We basically want to play e5 to make our pieces active here and then just, try to win with our extra pawn here. Now in this opening, black of course also gets this nice e5 square, which he oftentimes wants to go to, for example with knight to g4 and knight to e5. So he blockades our pawn here, blockades our plan, and he also has a really stable structure, as you can see, a really nice pawn structure, and that's why we also as white want to break this structure with e5. So okay, now white played h3. This is a nice move because, like we said, black wants to play knight to g4 and knight to e5 oftentimes, so this is a really useful move. Now black just played rook to a6, trying to, put more pressure on these weak pawns, and white just played bishop to g5. Now after h6, white just goes back to d2. Now why to d2? Why did the bishop go to d2? The point is that in a few moves, black is basically going to put pressure on our b pawn, and we want to play a move such as b3, so this pawn is well protected by the pawn on a2. But by doing that, we also weaken our diagonal here, as you can see, and this bishop is going to become really dangerous on this diagonal. So that's why bishop to d2 is a nice move, that after we play b3, our knight is going to be protected here on c3. And there are not going to be any discoveries made with this knight. I hope this was clear, because it's really important for you to understand it. So yeah, now black just doubled up with his queen, like we said, and now rook to e1. Like we said, this rook belongs here because we want to play e5 in the future. Now it's going to be hard because this queen is also looking at this pawn here and this diagonal here where the king is, and also the knight is protecting this square and the pawn. But we always have to keep this plan in mind because it's really useful. Okay, so rook to b8, just putting pressure on our b pawn, and after b3, everything is well protected. Now, knight to e8, the idea is basically to open up his bishop, and secondly to move his knight to c7 and, you know, join the attack on these pawns and the counterplay on the queen side, because that's where he has play. So, okay, white now just played rook to e2, and after knight to c7, he played rook to c1. Now after rook to a7 and queen to c2, black played knight to a6. Now the idea is clear. He basically wants to go to b4, from where he's going to attack our king, our queen, and also the pawn on a2. And he's just going to take it on the next move because he has the queen and the rook here piling up on this weak pawn here on a2. So that's why white just played knight to a4 here, blocking this file so our pawn can't be attacked here, and also preparing to take this knight when it lands on b4 with our bishop. So after knight to b4, white just took the knight and black recaptured. So now, as often happens in these Benko Gambit positions, it's pretty hard for both sides to do anything. Because, as you can see, black basically can't exert more pressure here on this pawn on a2 because our knight is basically blocking his whole counterplay, and by playing b3 everything here is protected. But now as white again, what are we going to do? Our plan is to play e5, but this square is well protected, and like we said, this queen here is annoying, attacking this d5 pawn and being on the same diagonal as the king. So the way Karpov wins this game is by making innocent slow moves and just waiting for the opponent to make a mistake. It's as simple as that, as you're going to see. Here, white played queen to d3, and after rook to a5, we have some maneuvering moves, you know, waiting moves, so I'm just going to go quickly through them. Okay, rook c2, h5, rook c4, rook b8, blah 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 blah. Nothing happens basically. And yeah, I just wanted to say here before queen to a8 that black can't create any other counterplay other than on these pawns, because if you play something like e6, you know, trying to break the center here, this is really bad because we can just take the pawn, and as you can see, he has created himself a lot of weak pawns and also a weak king. So here we can basically just play queen to g5, attacking the pawn, and after he defends it, let's say with king to h7, just queen to e7. We get into his position, we're attacking the knight, we're attacking the pawn, we're threatening knight to g5, and also, by the way, if the knight moves, e5 is also a really nice move, just breaking his structure, because, you know, if he takes, this pawn is also going to fall with tempo on the queen, and again, all the threats remain. So I just wanted to show you that black can't create any other counterplay than on these two pawns here. Okay, so now after a couple of waiting moves again, black just decided to play knight to b6. He wanted to play this move to get rid of our knight here, so then he can just start attacking our pawns here. So that's a sensible idea. But white just took the knight and then played a4. And now again, everything is defended. This pawn is protected by this guy, and also the b3 pawn is protected by the knight. So there are no problems for white whatsoever, and he's also better in this position. And now black, lacking for a plan, starts to make even more mistakes, trying to create some counterplay. As you will see now, bishop to h6, just trying to maybe take this knight, so then he can take the pawn on b3. This was his idea. But unfortunately for him, we have this f4 move just blocking the bishop. And now what seems like a nice idea at first, playing h4, you know, the idea is if we take, he wants to take here, and he ruined our king basically, our pawn structure, and he also wants to take here and then removing the defender of the b3 pawn. But we of course don't take on h4. We have this really nice move, queen to g4. Now we're just threatening to take his pawn on h4, And if he takes on g3, his king is on the same file as our queen, so we might have some attacking ideas, such as h4 and h5. This is really beautiful, and black absolutely has to do something about it, because these threats are pretty serious. Also, rook to h1 could come, you know, when this h file opens, it would be really dangerous for black. And things went south really fast in this game. So, okay, now king to h7, moving out of the file. And after h5, queen to g8, trying to defend like that. But Karpov said, okay, it's no problem. I will just play rook to c3, and I will include this rook to my attack. So now black played f5. Now, if you were thinking, what about if he takes on h5, we of course don't trade queens or anything. We just take on h5, and our next move is basically rook takes g3, rook takes rook to h1, and we're going to destroy black here basically. So this is not possible. That's why black tried f5, but it's really not that much better. We can just take on g6 with a check, and now we decline the exchange of queens because, as you can see, our king is completely safe. This pawn is basically a guard to our king, and his king is not safe because our other rook is coming here, and this king is going to be really exposed. Also, like we said, rook to g3, just crushing. But black doesn't give up, of course. He wants to exchange queens no matter what. So he plays queen to f6. And now Karpov is like, okay, if you want to exchange queens so badly, then let's do it. He played rook to h1. Now he wants to exchange queens, but under his conditions. You know, so that his rook is already here on the h file. Now what's the point? If black takes your queen and you recapture, the problems of the king being here are not gone. They're still here. And if you do something, sorry about that. If you do something stupid, then he will just take here. And now how are you going to save your bishop? He's going to play rook to h3 and just take your bishop, because it's pinned. So that's why you just have to play rook to a8. So then after you take here, he moves, and after you attack this bishop for the second time, he can give you an intermediate check here, and then he can just play rook to g6. But it's just losing for him, because he can't do anything. You still have this pressure here. You have an extra a pawn, extra pass pawn here. You can, by the way, just play a5 here, attacking the rook, and then just take this pawn, and when he moves, just play knight to c4. This pawn here, or actually, you can play knight to e4. Yeah, that's even better. Attacking the rook has no squares anymore to protect this bishop, and if he takes, of course, you just take a free bishop. So this is completely winning, guys. You can exchange queens and still be winning here, so it's really amazing. But yeah, after rook to h1, black didn't do that, black saw all that, and he just took on e4. Now we of course don't bother taking this pawn back, but we just take this pawn on g3. Now after rook to b4 and queen to g4, basically threatening mate on g8, there's almost nothing you can do about it. Black played rook to a8, defending this square basically. Now the winning move is just rook to h3. And it's really beautiful how vulnerable this king is. It seems like black can just play rook to g8 and, you know, pin your queen to the king. But actually, you can just take here on h6, because the king is basically mated. The only move is to take the rook, and after you take this, you just take this rook, and just over, of course. Black can basically resign, because if he doesn't play rook to g8, if he plays something else, then okay, you will take everything here. And what? You have a queen against two rooks, and also an extra knight here, so, and also an exposed king. So this is just over. Yo, if you made it to the end, I hope that you learned a lot of new stuff, that you had fun, and if you did, please subscribe to my channel, watch more videos, because I believe that they are very instructive. And yeah, that's all for today, and I'll see you guys in the next video.